Good afternoon. I'm Fred Delivert, winemaker at Tolosa. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual tasting Harvest on the Coast. So it's 2020. For obvious reasons, we could not hold our regular events. There's no grand tasting, there's no live auction. But thanks to technology, we're still connected, we're still here. So we're gonna spend an hour together and we're gonna taste wines, we're gonna talk wines, we're gonna talk winemaking. We did not forget the auction part. So please, if you can go on artisanauctions.com and look in the live event section for the slow coast wines, you're gonna be able to bid on the lots of the or for the silent auction. And at 3 p.m., you'll be able to join the live auction as well. I'm not the only host for that hour we're gonna spend together. I have actually somebody who speaks English fluently, so you'll be able to understand at least one of us. Joining me today is Master Sommelier Bob Bath. Bob, how are you? Thanks for being
Fred.
here.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome anytime, you know that.
Well, your English is much better than my French.
Okay, I take that. So, Bob, you're based in St. Helena, Napa Valley, but you're no stranger to the local life of San Luis Obispo, correct?
No, I'm not, Fred, and thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And we're going to have a lot of fun here. We're tasting through 4 wines, and thank you for buying this package that included these 4 wines. So we'll be tasting them with you. And of course, this Slow Coast Wine Auction is another big part of why we're with you today. So it's going to be a fun hour. We do need to finish at 3 o'clock, just so you have a chance to jump into that live auction. But I want to tell you a little bit about my background. Actually, I'm originally from Northern California, but both my wife and I went to school here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And really the biggest connection I had is I played baseball when I was here at Cal Poly, as did, of course, Robin Baggett, the owner of the Alpha Omega Collective. And so really our connection began several years ago. And I'm actually based now up in the Napa Valley. I work not only with the Alpha Omega Winery, part of this Alpha Omega Collective, but of course Tolosa, and then Paranet, which is our property that we have in Spain. So I work with all 3 properties, but my background really has been in wine in terms of teaching. I teach now at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone up in the Napa Valley, and of course in the Master Sommelier Organization. So I work with all 3 brands, but I particularly enjoy coming back here to San Luis Obispo. It has a wonderful history in terms of my personal education, but also to me, as far as wine, as far as California is concerned, this is one of the exciting areas for wine here in California.
It's true. So I don't know how familiar you are with Tolosa. I'm going to give you a little background on who we are here. Robin Baggett started to purchase land in probably 1988. And so we all started with developing a vineyard in Edna Valley. The winery came later in 1998. And from there, it was launched, you know. So we have strong roots in Edna Valley. We are a house known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And you know, I was wondering, Bob, you know the history of California wine industry much better than I do. Edna Valley in the late 80s. How does it play on the map of the wine regions of California?
Well, that's part of the reason that I'm so excited about this region is that it's still relatively new. And you think about Robin being one of the pioneers in the late 1980s. And of course, his goal initially was to have a cattle ranch. And really, I think he decided grapes were perhaps a little bit more exciting than raising cattle. So the transformation from 88 to 98 from cows to grapes, to me, is a transformation. But the history here is really a little bit under 50 years old. When you see the Niven family that came here in the early 1970s and established Paragon Vineyard, that was kind of simultaneous with other vineyards like Tepisque or Sierra Madre, or even Bien Nacido, which were down more in the Santa Maria area. This was really kind of the northern end, so to speak, of really the San Luis Obispo County. And I think the Nivens, like everybody at that time, planted a variety of different grapes, not knowing what would be popular at that point in time. There wasn't a history here of growing grapes and making wines. So simply planting everything gave each of these varieties a chance to see what would work. And what's happened over these last almost 50 years is we've really started to see that this is indeed a very cool region, and that grapes like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are really starting to stand out. But what I'm excited about is that when you look at this entire region, when you look at now the slow coast appellation that's in the process of being approved,
Right.
we've got an appellation that extends basically from maybe Cambria down to Santa Maria. And this is arguably the coolest growing region in all of California. So what we have here is a very unique area, an area that really, as far as grape growing, is relatively new. And now we're finding the right grapes to plant here. And I think that's exciting. And when we talk about the terroirs, we more in these wines today, it'll be really fun to really find out exactly what are these nuances of the slow coast and specifically the Edna Valley, where these grapes come from.
Yes. So here we are, Tolosa, for our virtual tasting Harvest on the Coast 2020. Bob, let's dig in. Let's see what are those Tolosa wines made of. One little detail I would like to mention: if we have time, we will take questions at the end of the segment. There's a Q&A button on the Zoom screen, and you are welcome to use this button. Faith Comey, our virtual ambassador, will handle the questions, and hopefully we'll have time to answer them. Bob, tasting time.
It is, Fred, and I love tasting with you. And then what we've set up here is something perhaps similar to what you've set up at home, but you'll notice that we have all four of the wines poured already. We have them all in Burgundy glasses. And so they've had a few minutes to kind of aerate. And temperature-wise, probably a little bit different temperatures for this. If you want to serve them one at a time, you can. If you want to serve them ahead of time like this, that's fine also. As far as glassware goes, this glass is really a wonderful glass just to accent the aromatics of these wines. If you don't have this many Burgundian glasses, maybe you want to use a little smaller glass for the rosé, which I think is just as good in a smaller glass. And then even if you want to go a step further, the Syrah will be awfully good in a Bordeaux style glass also. So again, these Burgundy glasses, like I said, are a great all-purpose glass in terms of accenting the aromatics of these wines. You'll notice also that we poured just about 2 to 3 ounces of each. Temperature-wise, I like to serve these Chardonnays right kind of in that 50 to 55 degrees. A little bit cooler on the rosé. I don't think you can get rosé really too cold. Let it warm up in your glass. So 45, maybe 50 max on that. And then really the Pinot Noir and the Syrah, maybe in that 60 to 65 range to start with, certainly. Let them warm up in your glass. So if anything, just as glasses or wines naturally warm up in the glass to room temperature, starting a little bit cooler is better than starting warmer, because they're really not going to get that much cooler in the course of it. The other thing too is, are you having anything with your wines today? Are you having a little bit of cheese? We're going to talk about some cheese pairings with each of these, but that to me is an ideal way of enjoying these wines. The cheese is going to make the wine taste that much better. You can share them with everybody. And we've really got some interesting ideas in terms of the type of cheese that work with each of these. But wine and cheese have this natural affinity. And I think that's one thing that makes these tastings a little bit more fun. We've also got a spit cup, as you notice here too, that's really completely optional in terms of what you want to have today. But again, sometimes when you're tasting 4 wines, or even more than this, you're tasting more after this, just a good way to kind of preserve yourself through the course of the afternoon. But we're going to taste 3 different vintages here. We're tasting the 2019, the 2018, and the 2017 vintage. These wines are all from the Edna Valley. Now, the Edna Valley is located just south of the town of San Luis Obispo. And really that and the Arroyo Grande Valley, which is just south of us here, are really the 2 key appellations in this northern part of San Luis Obispo County. Now, Paso Robles, for example, is over Cuesta Grade. It's a completely different area, viticulturally, as a matter of fact. And as I said earlier, the slow coast appellation will extend along the coast all the way down to Santa Maria, which is about 30 minutes to the south. But what we've got here is this beautiful 700-acre Edna Ranch that was, again, founded, originally developed by Robin Baggett. And that's what Fred Delivert is working with. He's working with a 700-acre property. And of course, there's a good portion with the Chardonnay, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, looking back at, that ranch was planted 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And it's interesting to see that back then they planted about 60, 2/3 of the ranch is Chardonnay, 1/3 is Pinot. And that shows that Chardonnay was the variety that people wanted in the Central Coast. Nowadays, there's some replanting happening, and we're kind of switching that proportion because Pinot is king around here. And even if we have a lot of affection for Chardonnay, we're still making Chardonnay. It seems like Chardonnay fell a little bit under the Pinot reputation.
Well, and I think you're right, Fred. And I'd have to say that perhaps Chardonnay is a little bit more flexible in terms of where it can grow as opposed to Pinot Noir. And having a region like this that's so cool, it probably makes more sense to take advantage of these cool temperatures, because you'll find Chardonnay, obviously, all the way up in Northern California. We'll find it in Sonoma. We'll find it in Napa. We'll find it in Santa Cruz. We'll find it in Monterey. We'll find it all the way down south into Santa Barbara. So we really have lots of regions that really make pretty darn good Chardonnay. Pinot Noir, a little bit more sensitive. So again, we don't have as many regions. So I think that shift has only been because we really are not going to find probably, and there probably aren't many left of those regions that are ideally suited for this. But not to discount the quality of the Chardonnay coming from this region. I think it's really unique. And that's part of what we want to share with you is simply what makes Edna Valley Chardonnay unique. And when I'm looking at this wine, first of all, swirling it in the glass, really getting those aromas to kind of come up, you really want to enjoy something in terms of Chardonnay, which essentially has the capacity to age. It has the capacity to really become something more. And what I smell so much, and I think what people talk so much about today, they talk about the presence of oak, the unoaked Chardonnays. You have a heavier oak style Chardonnay, and this is not a heavy oak Chardonnay. Fred?
It's not so. It's more part of my style. I want the variety to shine in the bottle, shine in the glass. And to me, if you use too much oak, the oak comes on top of the wine. I want to use the oak to lift up the wine. So I'm really always cautious about the amount of oak I use, and I'm pretty picky too about, you can go down into details, and I'm picky about what coopers I work with and what toast level. I mean, you can go really down deep in details with your use of oak, and that impact how you impact your wine with your barrels. And I think 2018, if I remember, we're probably around, I think we didn't reach 25% of new oak. So it's really subdued. It's there, but it's a spice to me. You're cooking, you use spice to just add a layer, and I use oak just to just spice up the wine.
Well, I think spice is a key word too, because when you look at the smells of oak, and we can talk about toast, we can talk about vanilla, we can talk about smoke, but really the baking spices, the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the clove, to me, these are really those baking spices that I notice more in this, which means the oak is a little bit more subdued in the wine. And like you said, it's really more about balance. And when you have wonderful fruit here, when you really kind of want to showcase that, to me, that's balance.
Exactly. You don't want to kill that fruit. You want it to shine.
And I think the other thing too is we probably want to talk a little bit about other types of fruits. The fruits I'm smelling here are more, they're apples. They're kind of golden crisp apple. There's Fuji apple here. There's some wonderful kind of honeydew melon. There's even some pear here also. Wonderful fruits that I think are signature fruits of really the Edna Valley. But we have some other non-fruit smells here, don't we?
I have a mineral note, and that's another Edna trademark to me. The fruit, okay, it's Chardonnay, so you pear, apple, it's always there. Mineral, it's not everywhere in California, and we're lucky enough that we have it here. And I just love it being French. It's part of my DNA. But Edna to me too usually opens past that minerality. You always have a little bit of citrusy character, lemony, and in the Chardonnay, and that's showing as well for me now.
I totally agree with you. And when we talk about those other kind of smells, we're talking about this idea of malolactic fermentation, and malolactic fermentation is a little bit confusing for a lot of people, simply because not really a fermentation. We're really kind of converting acids, aren't we? And we're creating maybe a little bit more of a buttery component in the nose. Maybe we're creating a little bit more texture on the palate. But for me, malolactic is something that's really a key part of this region, because in many places of the world, France, for example, malolactic fermentation is designed to make a wine taste softer, reduce a wine that perhaps is a little high in acid. Here, we almost kind of need that in Edna Valley certain years, right?
Exactly. Edna Valley, we're a cool climate growing area, and then we have a lot of acid in our wines. And monitoring the malolactic fermentation is a tool for us to balance more the wines. There's some vintage where we would go 100% malolactic. Every single lot of Chardonnay goes through malolactic just to soften everything up. What I noticed, I'm on my 4th vintage now. I kind of go not in the middle, but there's some lots I like to go through malolactic with them, and some I don't, because that gives me more tools after to balance the final product.
And now, having tasted the wine, I really taste that richness and the full body of this wine. And what I love about it is that it covers my palate, and yet there's that lemony acidity there, that kind of apple now, which was Fuji apple, is now more green apple. It's really very balanced, and it's not heavy by any means. And really, when you look at this in terms of of food, and particularly cheeses, I like to think of white wines more with the softer cheeses. So if you're thinking of a brie, if you're thinking of
Yeah,
say camembert,
something
even brie Savarin,
something fat, a fat cheese. Yeah,
exactly. This is what,
creamy.
yeah, that creaminess, and of course the acidity is going to cut through that cheese. Those are just wonderful pairings to really make this wine taste even better.
Something we I would like to mention too, because it's interesting. We have 4 different wines and 3 different vintages, Bob.
Yeah.
2018, the vintage by itself was very interesting. It was a very long growing season, and I think it shows really well in the wine, because for me, when we have such a elongated growing season, there's more complexity. The fruit just take its sweet time to get to the where we want it to be, and that Chardonnay is very layered, and to me that resonates with how long was that growing season in 18. Very, very smooth. There was no hiccup. It was pretty steady, but it was really long. I remember everybody post harvest. I mean, we finished harvesting mid-November for some reds, and we were pressing on Thanksgiving weekend. Everybody's still like, oh my gosh, remember 2018, how long it was. And I'm glad the wine shows, it's a site and it's a vintage. That's what you have in a bottle of wine. And 2018, the depths we get in the 18s right now, it comes from that long growing season we had.
And you're right, it's all about long growing season, something they call hang time. And I think so often we don't count our blessings here in California. You look at other parts of the world, really they don't have the consistency from year to year.
Very well.
But 2018, even with our consistency of weather, is a very special year. And I think, like you said, those grapes are gliding maturity rather than racing to maturity. And I think that gliding allows them to develop those layers, what creates the complexity in the wine, and also creates perhaps ageability. So 18, certainly a very special year in terms of this. And I think this 2018 1772 Chardonnay is a great example of not only Edna Valley, but the 2018 vintage.
Correct. It's delicious.
Absolutely delicious. Ready to move on to rosé?
Different wine, different vintage.
Yeah, it is. But America's finally discovered rosé, haven't they? It took us a while, but we finally got there.
So we had a little talk with Bob earlier on, and I was okay. I'm obviously French, and I came in California about 20 something years ago, and working in different wineries, there was no rosé, and I was just a youngster then, and really surprised. And we had access to, we were bleeding to concentrates or things like that, and we were just dumping that Saignée juice in the drain. And I was asking the winemakers, well, what about making rosé? We could totally make rosé. And everybody was like, Fred, rosé, nobody wants to hear about rosé. So that was, late 90s. And here we are, 2020. And, it's a total turnaround. We cannot make enough rosé. America discovered the rosé. And, it was funny to live that, because at the beginning, we had to, I say, Mickey Mouse rosés, because people wanted rosé and we had to give them rosé. And it was a very weird blend of different varietals that nobody would have put together in France. Now it's over. Rosé is a legit tier of wine in the landscape of the wine industry in California. And I'm glad, because I love rosé. And here we are, Pinot Noir house. We make a rosé of Pinot from scratch, from good grapes of Pinot. I have special blocks that I love, and I keep them just to make the rosé. What do you think about?
Well, to your point though, Fred, we can make rosé from virtually any red grape, can't we? So I think, like you said, it's really kind of how serious you are about it. And I think we kind of owe a debt to rosé in this country, because if you think of Sutter Home, which a rosé that was pioneered in the late 1960s, maybe a little bit on the sweet side, but that was a fundamental wine in kind of the evolution of the American palate. And so we were drinking sweet rosé as we learned about other varieties like Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. We kind of needed to go through that phase. Now we're in this new phase of rosé where we're having something like this, a dry rosé from a wonderful, elegant grape, Pinot Noir. And now we're really finding the serious side of rosé. And I think that's what you said earlier, is that you're going out to make these rosés, you're picking blocks of the vineyard, you're saying this is what we're going to be making rosé with, and you're really not taking leftovers or kind of use something else up. This is something that you're thinking about from the very beginning.
totally. It's the rosé has its own protocol process now, and I'm a big fan of that light color comes from now. It's always it's only all cluster press. I We get the Pinot Noirs early in the morning. We put it in the press and we press those red grapes. The color in a red varietal is in the skin, in the pigment in the skin. If you press, I think it's what 95% of the red varietals have a white juice. So you press that red variety, and you have a very light tainted juice. That's what we do with a Pinot Noir, and I think it shows it's a beautiful color. You have a very light, delicate color, and then we ferment the juice very cold, like a white fermentation, because that's how you preserve the aromas. That's how you preserve the acidity of the wine, and no oak. I experimented here a little bit since 2017 with oak in rosé, and I just don't like it. So we keep everything in stainless steel, either stainless steel tanks, or now we actually have those stainless steel drums, so barrel size.
Yeah.
But they're very versatile because we can stir the lees, so we can work actually on the rosé too and build up some meat palette to balance the wine with the acidity.
Well, you bring up a couple of important points too, in terms of the fact that no oak on this Pinot Noir rosé. In other words, most rosés are made in stainless steel tanks, and the beauty of it is that they are ready to go when they're released. This is a 2019 vintage. We'll talk about that
Oh yeah.
vintage in just a moment. But again, these should be drunk young. They're not necessarily going to age forever. They still get better over a couple of years. But I just love the freshness of rosé, and I think particularly as something to start a meal, or even something maybe if you want to handle food itself. As a matter
Yeah.
of fact, it's
Or
not
a sipper.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
absolutely delicious, and when I smell it, I think of everything from oranges to
Mhm.
strawberries. I always very fruity in terms of nose, but that has a little bit to do with the yeast here, isn't it?
You're right. It's and it's part of that process of making a true rosé program at Tolosa, and we experimented with yeast. Now we're down to three yeast that I really like, and yeast have a huge impact on rosé, especially on because they produce esters, and esters are aromatics. And so I use three different yeast, and they give me all a different character. And when I put all my lots together, I get more complexity from that.
So I guess some people are probably thinking, why did you take these wonderful Pinot Noir grapes and make rosé out of it? You could have made more Pinot Noir. But this is actually more about picking early, isn't it? Maybe about blocks that perhaps are better suited for
Exactly.
rosé.
We have some blocks that are quad blocks, so very big vines in vigorous area, and then we would have to wait probably a long time to get that Pinot Noir to the perfect ripeness for making a red Pinot Noir.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the ideal candidate to be used for rosé. I mean, the aromatics are beautiful. We pick early, so we stay with a very lower level of alcohol, and then that has a razor sharp acidity that I think you should have in any good rosé.
Well, and I was just thinking about the acidity as I was tasting this wine. The beauty of it is that really that orange now is almost like tangerine. It's that
It
wonderful kind of
changes a lot.
and really kind of nectarine almost as well. And I think this acidity is something that really creates this uh, salivation in my mouth. It makes me want to have more of it. It makes me want to have food. And when you're having something like this, it's not a heavy wine by any means. But
No.
cheese wise, I'm going to go up just a little bit firmer cheese now. Now I'm thinking about, say, Monterey Jack, or I'm thinking of something maybe like Comté, for example, even Gruyere. In other words, the cheese has a little bit more body to it. And really that acidity is going to cut through it right and really make it beautiful, but maybe not into really my really hard, saltier cheeses yet. So we're going one step up, but food wise, I'm thinking things like a panzanella bread salad. I'm thinking of really all kinds of different foods, even something as strong as salmon this could stand up to.
I like that idea. You mentioned acidity. To me, acidity goes with the 2019 vintage. 2019, so Etna Valley, we mentioned that we're one of the coolest or the coolest area in California in terms of climate. But 2019, we went that even a little up. We upped that a notch, and it was a cool vintage in a cool area. And that's what I would retain from 2019. It's the acidity we find all across the board of our wines. And if you go to the Taste the Pinot Noirs that will be released fairly soon, I think we have a more earthy profile in our Pinot Noir thanks to that cooler growing season we had in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely delicious in terms of really just the aromas and then the flavors itself. And
A lot of floral notes now coming.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a 2019. I think these wines age beautifully next 2 or 3 years. But I think what you'll find today, if you have this bottle open, this is probably gonna be the first one you're gonna finish.
Mhm.
I think this is the one that goes down and really just refreshing. And like you said, it's good simply by itself, but it's also awfully good with food. Also, I love that about rosé.
It just leaves your mouth watering, and you're like, yeah, I just need more. So we're in a Pinot world, and we're gonna transition from the rosé of Pinot to the good old Pinot Red, and in 1772 Pinot Noir, 1772 being our signature tier at Tolosa. And tell me what you think about the wine, Bob.
Well, I think Pinot Noir, of course, as you said, we're realizing where to plant it in terms of cooler regions, why that's where so much more is being planted here. But at the same time, I think we're learning how to make it better too. And there's a lot of different styles of Pinot Noir. There's lighter styles, there's heavier styles. But Pinot Noir is always going to be a grape that perhaps doesn't have the tannins of Cabernet Sauvignon, it doesn't have the body. This is about finesse, it's about elegance, it's really about I think really a place. And I think this is where Edna Valley seems to really kind of take center stage, because it's not only a cool climate, but you mentioned something earlier. When I smell this wine, I smell the grape, but I also smell earth. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is that not only is this a great area for climate, but it's also a great area for soils. And right about past Robles, as a matter of fact, that Santa Lucia mountain range kind of turns and goes east. And of course, you come over Cuesta Grade into San Luis Obispo. But what happens, in other words, is now all of this San Luis Obispo coast is exposed. In other words, we are right here. In many cases, with some of the vineyards in this wine, we're less than 5 miles from the ocean, but there's no barrier. There's no Santa Lucia mountains that are kind of blocking that air. So that easy access of air is letting cool air in, but also these are uplifted seabed soils. We talk about things like limestone, which you don't find much of anywhere in California. What we've got, in other words, is not only a combination of great climate, but great soils.
Totally. And so you're right, we have that huge influence of the Pacific Ocean, both by the climate and by the soils. But don't forget the ridge of the Santa Lucia Island, because we are lucky enough, we have that other huge soil formation, which is volcanism there. So we are at the frontier of ocean soils, volcanic soils, and we ended up with, I think we have over 62 different soils in Edna Valley, which for a winemaker, it's great, because you can have the same variety, the same clone of the same variety, but planted in 2, 3, 4 different soils. And if you add on top of that the mesoclimate of the block, it's just a mosaic of blocks to play with and make great wines with.
And part of what you're saying makes me think the Edna Valley is a big area. First of all, I think people need to realize this is a small area. We're talking about 2,500 planted acres. And so these are vineyards that are kind of scattered around what looks like a little bit of a valley floor, which is really the Edna Valley, but then tucked up on those hillsides, like you said, right in the flanks of those Santa Lucia mountains are some of these great Pinot Noir vineyards, or maybe even closer down towards the coast itself. But most of the time when you see a hill, you're probably thinking this is probably where they put Pinot Noir, in those settings where perhaps the soils aren't as deep, where the vine has to struggle a little bit more. But then we really look at really the unique aspects of Pinot Noir. It does taste different in different places. And that's the beauty of it, is that what we find in I think Pinot Noir is that the complexities, the differences don't come so much in adding other grapes. The complexities come in the location. And even in this 700-acre Edna Ranch, you've got a lot of differences, a lot of complexities to work with, don't you?
We do, because if you look at Edna Ranch, we can under Edna Ranch we have 5 different locations. So as I said, we in 5 different locations give us very different type of soils, very different mesoclimates, and I mean, it's almost like impossible to embrace all the possibility you have there. So you have to, and think about that too, to know such a big ranch. I mean, we have only 1 shot per year, right? There's only 1 harvest. So you choose the block for that harvest, and then you harvest, and you're like, oh wow, I like that, but what about this one? And so you have to wait 1 more year. So we're talking, I mean, that importance of time when you make wine. You know, there's not instant gratification. It takes years to build up a legacy and build up a very strong wine program, because you just know the result of what you did once a year. And that's a huge difference between old world Europe and new world here, where it seems we're still the industry, even if was it's granted we had vines here for decades, but it's still almost a baby industry compared to what happened in Italy, in France, and that's why those regions are specialized. So to me, it's super exciting to see that even after just few decades in California, we're already able to say, oh wow, Central Coast, that kind of weather, those soils. Let's focus on Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and some few other aromatic varietals.
Well, and I know you were talking earlier, and you were particularly excited about the new Pinot Noir plantings, the new vineyards going in, and to your point, we haven't figured it out yet. We have figured out that this is a great place for Pinot Noir, but what clone should I plant, or where should I? How should I farm this? What row orientation should I have? There's so many decisions in terms of a planting a vineyard, and then of course you've got to wait for that vineyard to become productive, and then you've got to wait till you make the wine a few years to see how it came out. So it's the immediate gratification. I don't think any winemaker could exist on immediate gratification. It simply doesn't exist in your trade. It's a matter of being patient, isn't it?
Totally. Patience is mother of virtue, right? And you have to. It just, it's just a slow process.
Yeah. And when I'm smelling Pinot Noir, typically I'm thinking about red fruits. I'm thinking about everything from cherries, and those cherries can be anywhere from Bing or Rainier cherries to dark cherries. We're going to be talking about raspberries and strawberries, and even pomegranate for that matter, maybe even cranberry. And of course, we can get into plums also. So when you go throughout California and you taste different Pinot Noirs from California, maybe you've tasted something from the Sonoma coast, or you've tasted something from Carneros in the Napa Valley, or even something from down in Santa Barbara. Each of them are a little bit different. And so what we notice, in other words, in the Edna Valley Pinot Noirs is a little bit of that trademark earthiness. Maybe it comes across to you as mushroom, maybe as a fine style of dirt. But there's also, for me, a lot of that cherry and kind of that strawberry in there. To me, that's really a signature of this. But we're really talking about oak in terms of Pinot Noir, aren't we, too? We've got to be careful. It seems like every step of the way with Pinot Noir, like you said, it's not very forgiving. So we don't want to put too much oak on it, do we?
I have the same approach that with white. To me, I sometimes use that analogy. The Pinot Noir is kind of the white varietal of the red. It doesn't make sense, but except when you make it, because Pinot Noir, you have to be, it's very delicate, it's very fragile. If you do something wrong with Pinot Noir, you taste it right away. And there's no way of masking that, hiding that. If you deal with Bordeaux varietals, well, you can blend, right? You don't blend Pinot Noir with other varietal. It is Pinot Noir. So you need to be very careful and very precise in what you make. Otherwise, you pay cash any mistakes. So oak, yes, I mean, you can over oak a Pinot Noir, but is that what I want? Not really, because Pinot Noir is beautiful. Pinot Noir is a very elegant, aromatic, powerful variety, and you want to show that in your wine. One more time, I don't want the oak to come on top of my wine and cap it. I want the oak just to help elevating the wine. And so 2017, my first vintage at Tolosa, by the way, I think we were about only 25% of new oak.
Yeah, this is 2017. This is the 1772 Pinot Noir. And I think one thing you talked about oak also is that not only is it the amount of new oak, but it's the time in oak. And so often we think of oak not only adding flavor to, say, the Bordeaux varieties, but also it's the time in oak that'll create more of that tannic structure, that backbone of say, those Bordeaux varieties. The backbone here is going to be more about acidity, isn't it?
It is, and because we are in Edna Valley, one more time, we cannot say it enough. It's coastal valley, cool weather translate into great acidity in our wines. Something I would like to mention, Bob, for everybody who's listening to us, because we are lucky. It's a 17 vintage, so it was bottled 2 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the wine, evolution of the aromas and flavors with bottle aging? I think it's interesting.
Well, and I agree with you, Fred, because for me, if you think about that, 2 years seems like a long time since this wine was bottled. But honestly, I think a lot of wines like this need 2 years. So we probably, in the United States, drink our wines relatively young. And stylistically, a lot of winemakers have decided to make wines that taste better early on, simply because they're adapting to the American palate, which probably makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, these wines, to me, which were bottled 2 years ago, are just starting to have that kind of balance. And what I mean by balance is that perhaps the acidity is a little bit softer. In other words, it's not quite as tart. Maybe the flavors are a little bit more prominent in terms of not only fruits, but also non-fruits. Maybe that mushroom and earth coming through a little bit more, maybe those wonderful floral aromas like the roses that we're smelling in this wine. So really it's that maturation of the nose, first of all, accenting both fruits and non-fruits, but also on the palate,
Yes.
accenting really perhaps less acidity and more richness. And so it starts to cover the palate more, and you have more body, it seems like, as the wines get older. And then finally, it's the finish. I think that's
Mhm.
that finish becomes even more evident. When I taste this wine, I'm still tasting it. And I think that length of that finish, the layers that we talk about in these wines, to me are the difference between a good wine and a great wine.
I totally agree with you. And no, I had not tasted any 17 Pinot for a long time, and I'm really pleased with what I have today. And it's almost like they're just starting to show what they are, you know. And I get especially the mouthfeel is very seamless. It glides. It's everything is finally integrated and comes together. And you know, maybe early on you had a more prominent fruit, and now I start to get a little bit of more bottle age character with some leather notes, a little bit of tobacco,
Yeah.
and things like that. And I think that's really exciting for me to taste that wine.
Well, I know you jumped right into it in 2017, didn't you? You hit the ground running when you got here.
I did, yes. So I think I started 3 weeks before harvest, and I just got to drive everywhere, and I spent those 3 weeks just getting to know the vineyards because I knew the call would have to be made really soon. And on top of that, 2017 was kind of the warmer vintage I had to deal with. So things heat up pretty early, and we picked the first Pinot Noir on August 15th, which is pretty early, but that goes well with the style of wine I want to make. And so I don't remember anything about the growing season. I was not here, but harvest, I do remember that heat spell we had at Labor Day weekend, because for my first harvest, I mean,
Yeah.
that heat spell, we had to bring break fruit in. I didn't want to let the things that were already out because they would have been overripe. And I think over 2 days, we did about 25% of the total of harvest tonnage. So that was pretty intensive. That's a memory I have about 17, and the fact that that was a warmer vintage I dealt with, and so maybe the fruit is a little darker in that 17 too, compared to vintage of 18, 19.
Yeah.
A little darker, a little a broader wine maybe.
Yeah, dark cherries, and we almost get to plums here, as a matter of
Yeah.
fact, in terms of that. So I think I love that. And to your point also, though, I think a lot of people think that the red grapes ripen later and that they're picked later. And surprisingly, this Pinot Noir was probably picked before most of the Chardonnay grapes. And I think
Mhm.
the fact that the growing season is shorter. And I think the other thing too is that these Pinot Noir vines are not necessarily that productive. So you've got this kind of fussy vine that's early maturing, but even the amount of fruit that you get it is really not that much, is it?
No, Pinot Noir doesn't set a lot of fruit, and especially, as I mentioned earlier, Robin started to plant vines here in the 90s. We are dealing with old vines, where old vines, they kind of slow themselves down as well, and yields, we're talking about on, I mean, some blocks are a ton and a half, 2 tons, 2 tons and a half. So it's very important too, because I mean, all the studies in viticulture, they link quality of the grapes to the quantity of the grapes. It's directly, and with such low yields, it's almost a guarantee of good concentration of the fruit.
Exactly. And so at the same time, I think when I'm thinking of food here, cheese wise, maybe I'm going up now to Fontina or something like Taleggio and a little bit firmer
Mhm.
cheese here, maybe just a hint of saltiness that helps make the wine taste even a little bit softer. But I love those kind of flavorful cheeses with these wonderful aromas and flavors of Pinot Noir. So it's really a great pairing, but this is pretty darn good by itself. And I think this wine to me is starting to reach maturity. Would I age this longer? You betcha I would. This wine has another wonderful 5, maybe even 10 years
Mhm.
ahead of it. But to wait, as I said, just a couple of years after you buy wines, storing them properly and enjoying them in a beautiful glass like this, now you're going to really start to see what this wine has always wanted to be, and I think what you envision for it.
Yes, and it's something, coming from France, we do more often. We do buy wines and to cellar them, and I'm really grateful to taste at 17 today, because it's just starting to shine for me.
Yeah. Now, I know some people talk about clones in Pinot Noir, and perhaps the idea of clones being the identity a grape develops over a period of time in a place. And you can transfer that personality, can't you? You can graft a cutting from a vineyard and really take that
Propagate, yes,
personality and transfer it
very
to
well.
another vineyard. And really the clones become very important in Pinot Noir, don't they?
Yes, it's part of the specificity of the Pinot Noir world. We're very attached to that clone, and we. It seems like every clone has its own personality. So when we discuss between winemakers, we're always like, oh, and what is that clone, or what clone do you plant here? Because we know, and that's why they were identify and propagate, because they have certain specificity. To me, the few of the most famous clones being 777, 828. So Dijon clone coming from France. 777 is a more of a, it gives me more of a fruit approach to the Pinot. 828 is more almost a standalone clone that would have not only the fruitiness, but the structure, the acidity, and things like that. So when it's very important to know what we're planting, what we're dealing with, and trying to find the best, when you replant, or the best way of the way to put the clone that we think is gonna shine in that spot.
Exactly.
The adequation, that's the word I was looking for. Adequation of clone with the site.
Exactly. And then expressing that grape. And that grape's got a story to tell from the place it's located in. And that clone's really going to be the voice, isn't it, of that place and of that grape?
It will be. It will be. To me, a bottle of wine, it's the expression of a place on that vintage. It's where it was, with the way where it grew, with how the weather was, and you capture that and you put a cork on it.
Bottled time, I think.
Bottled time. I'm a big fan. I do think in America there's a tendency of drinking our wines too early, and each time I go back to an older wine, I'm like, it's so different. You do lose that fruitiness that you cannot pinpoint exactly the fruit. It's just kind of melted together. It's there, but it's melted, and those bottle age character we talk about are not there when they're young. So it's super interesting to see them now.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, I sure love that Pinot Noir, the 2017 1772 Pinot Noir from Tolosa here in the Edna Valley. We move to the last wine, and you can see this wine is distinctly darker than the Pinot Noir. We'll be tasting the 2017, also 1772 Syrah from here on the property. And Syrah is a grape, I know we've talked about this before, is that we find it planted in warm climates and cooler climates. And it certainly has had some success here in the Edna Valley with people like John Albin. So again, it has an ability to be successful in cool environments, but maybe less planted, not as popular, certainly as Pinot Noir and Chardonnay here in the Edna Valley.
Yeah, I don't think, pretty famous varietal south of France, no, Rhone Valley as well. Less here. I don't know why. It makes beautiful wine, but it seems like you have to be more like a Syrah geek, a true geek to enjoy Syrah. It seems it's a harder varietal to throw in a market like that. Not everybody just like click with Syrah. Here we are, Syrah grew, I said, in the Rhone Valley, northern Rhone being cooler, southern Rhone being warmer, and here we have a cooler area, and it gives us a certain profile of Syrah. I mean, the fruit is not as exuberant as warmer places. We get more like a peppery, but it's super interesting to work with. To me, it's a little bit of, we have two troubled children here on the ranch. It's Syrah and Grenache. Why? Because those two varietals, they need heat to get ripe. And so being in a cooler area, they take a really long time to get where we need to bring them in order of harvesting them. And Syrah is always a late harvested fruit. Usually we bring that fruit in October. We were lucky, as I say, 2017, a warmer vintage, so it was earlier in October, but we still had to wait until October to bring the Syrah in.
I'll tell you, and I think in terms of an exercise in patience, this is truly what this is, as a matter of fact. But we've got the 2017 vintage here, so a little bit warmer vintage, so perhaps got there a little bit faster, say, than 2019.
Yes.
But it's interesting with Syrah. I think in France, we see it blended with other grapes like Grenache. We see it blended with grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon in Australia. It really has the ability to blend with other grapes and also stand alone. And of course, this is 100% Syrah. So we have the essence of that. What I love about it right away, though, is just this dark color. What is it like as a variety in the vineyard? Is it really, it's a very thick skin, so that's where we get that dark color?
Thick skin. It's larger cluster. It's a very typical loose, larger cluster with a very, it's funny, the stem is very, it's almost neon green. And it's very specific. Yeah, and you put a cluster of Pinot Noir, which would be like almost hand size, and the cluster of Syrah would be like 3 times the size of that. And yes, it's darker berries too, and so therefore it explains why the wine ends up being so dark. Yeah. And in terms of winemaking, you know, we age the Syrah longer too. It's a varietal that needs more time in barrel to just get more soft and more integrated in terms of structure with acidity. And so usually we bottle our Syrah after, oh my gosh, we had like 16 months, 17 months of aging. So very different from the Pinot that
almost twice as long.
Exactly, that we age for only 9 months. I use French oak as well. It can take a little bit more French oak because it's a more robust variety. The wine is more robust. So in terms of, you know, I was saying that Pinot Chardonnay, very elegant, delicate variety. I don't use a lot of new oak. And Syrah, I know I can go 35%, 40% new oak, and it can take it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And I think with a wine like this too, we didn't decant this wine ahead of time, but Syrah is a variety, particularly this type of style of Syrah. I think putting a decanter an hour ahead of time before you have it is really a great idea. So think about your decanting your Syrahs ahead of time. And really, I think you'll enjoy it that much more. Even just an hour ahead of time will make a big difference. But when I'm smelling this wine, I'm smelling dark fruits. Now we've moved away from those red fruits of Pinot Noir to the blackberries, the black currants, really the very dark, even maybe a little bit of a blueberry also in terms of that. So really the fruits have changed completely here.
Totally. And I think for you guys joining us and going from Pinot to Syrah, you can see that we do different things in Edna Valley. We do, and maybe you're more familiar with the Pinot because that's what we always talk about. But there's some interesting other red wines that we make here, and on a total different profile.
Exactly, and it's really, I think, even though it's a cooler climate, even though we have this diversity of soils, there's really a wide variety of different grapes that we can grow here in Edna Valley, and it's really just a matter of really kind of finding the right place for them. But it's exciting to see what's happened, and perhaps there'll be new varieties in the future. That perhaps we haven't even discovered yet in the Edna Valley. But for the meantime, we've got a wonderful list of them here in the vineyards here at Tolosa.
So Bob, cool climate Syrah, what are you smelling? What are you expecting from a cool climate?
You know, I always like a little bit of that black pepper. I always like a little bit of that kind of leathery aroma that you mentioned a little bit in the Pinot Noir. But again, I smell a little bit of that herbs de Provence. I smell a little bit of course, your homeland of Toulouse in southern France. There's always going to be a little bit of that earthiness, but it's more of a darker earthiness, and maybe a little bit of that char, that kind of char that you might get on, say, a steak or something like that. I always feel like I smell a little bit of that meaty char.
That could be a little bit more New York, I said.
Yeah.
So to me, that char, I associate it more with the New York.
Yeah.
And that sweetness too. Yeah. There's a certain sweetness
that
we didn't have in the Pinot that can probably, like, you know, that vanilla bean maybe.
Right.
And I think it's more because there's a little bit more New York.
Yeah, and a little bit of violets here also, I think.
That's a good one, violet, yes.
But wonderful aromatics, and I think this is the kind of aroma, like I said, that just gets better and better over time. It keeps opening up. Let's go ahead and taste it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I notice about Syrah right away is this is heavier. This is fuller bodied than the Pinot Noir. And it's a wine that, again, it has more tannic structure. It's drier. It's more bitter in the finish. And that's really why it's probably compared a lot to grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not quite as dry as Cabernet Sauvignon, not quite as tannic. There's things about the balance of Syrah to me that really make it, particularly when it's younger, a little bit more enjoyable than, say, a young Cabernet Sauvignon. The other thing I love about this too, though, is I'm still tasting this. There's that ripe kind of black fruit flavor, a lot of those plums, and even maybe a little bit of dark chocolate coming out now in this wine. But again, that kind of signature earthy flavor of Edna Valley.
I get a lot of that herbs, that garlic, that's almost a little bit of crushed rock as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That you mentioned earlier. And you're at home, you have those two red wines side by side, and it's a magic of wines, you know. Pinot, not really dark, Syrah really dark,
Yeah,
and
it's a
Pinot
wonderful comparison.
light, delicate, elegant, Syrah more robust, more a bolder wine.
Yeah. And I taste a wine like this, and I'm thinking, okay, we're going 10, maybe 15 years. If you can wait that long, you're really going to appreciate this wine. And I think having a few bottles and stashing them away, or for me, ideally, I like to have 3 or 4 bottles of something and then kind of watch it, how it changes over time. Maybe have it 1 year and then maybe wait a couple years and have it again, and just really kind of enjoy this
Yeah.
wine as it ages and see how it changes in the glass. And they become kind of special occasions because now you've got a friend that you're kind of revisiting and kind of catching up with.
And you kind of you explore your taste. You see if you like a wine younger, a wine older. You see if you like Pinot Noir on the younger side or Pinot Noir on the older side. And you might like old Pinot and young Syrah. I mean, there's so many combinations, but yeah, that's something you can do at home by just, I do the same. I always have 6 bottles of a wine because I like to revisit them year after year and see how they evolve.
And it's certainly okay if you like it now, but all
There's
we're
nothing wrong with
reassuring
that.
you is that it's going to get that much better. And I think the other thing to remember too is that having food with this, and again, now we're looking at a harder, more saltier type cheese. I'm thinking something more like Manchego or something like Mahone. Both are more Spanish style cheeses. Those really are just wonderful pairings with this. You could go into more Italian hard cheeses too, maybe a Pecorino Romano, something like that as well. So really the harder, saltier cheeses will match up to the body of this and maybe make those tannins a little bit softer, so it really brings out more of the fruit of the wine.
Good advice. Good advice. I love your cheese pairing with wine. It's a good idea.
Well, it's fun and it's relatively easy to do. I think when you have a group like this, it's really fun. I think at this point now to kind of talk about it with people and say, what was your favorite wine? What did you like about this? And I think tasting these wines and learning. And to me, when you have 3 or 4 wines together like this, you really have an opportunity to really point out or identify for yourself what you like. And there's no obligation. The beauty of wine is that you really have a chance to say, these are the kind of wines I like, and this is why. And so really the options are kind of unlimited.
And nobody is wrong because we are talking about your own taste, and you like what you taste, you like what you like, and you know, I like Syrah, Bob doesn't.
I love
Bob
Syrah.
likes Syrah, I don't like Syrah. Bob is not wrong, I'm not right. It's just the beauty of wines. There's a wine for everybody.
There's probably too many varieties that I like. As a matter of fact, I can't decide most of the time in terms of that. There's just so many out there.
I'd be right
so
there
we're really
with you.
having fun. So I think the beauty of this is that enjoying the variety, enjoying the different regions of California. And what you've had a chance to do today is learn about the Edna Valley and taste varieties that you probably know, like Chardonnay or Pinot Noir from the Edna Valley, and really kind of putting them in context. And that's the beauty of it, is that you really have seen, I think, a great expression of this, certainly through your hands, your very capable hands, Fred. And I think this is a region that to me is only going to get better in terms of that. We're learning more. We're getting better at it. We've got a place that's blessed with great terroir. The future looks very bright here in Edna Valley.
I hope so. I work in the Edna Valley, and I'm all about that. You know, we need to go always higher, always up a notch. So.
Well, and with the new slow coast appellation coming soon, you're really going to see something that to me kind of exemplifies a part of California that is still kind of undiscovered. This is such a wonderful place to come visit, so much to kind of see and do and to eat here. And I think what I love about it is the fact that you can be among the people who have discovered Edna Valley. You can be those ones that kind of are in the inside, because this is still kind of an insider's appellation and people are discovering it. It's just exciting to know that what's here is going to get that much better.
Looking forward to the future. Bob, thank you very much for joining me. Cheers.
Thank you, Fred. Enjoyed tasting with you today.
Always. So it's time for us to wrap up our virtual tasting of the Harvest on the Coast 2020.
We've got that auction coming up, right? In 5 minutes?
Exactly. That's what I wanted to mention. Don't forget, go on artisanauctions.com, look for their live event, and look at the slow wine coast lots. Something, you know, I'm the Tolosa winemaker. We put a very interesting lot, and
interesting. It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's so amazing that I cannot remember everything. I need my paper at that point. We have a big lot. It's a 3-night stay at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort and Spa. I'm gonna take you on a vineyard tour, and we're gonna have fun. Believe me. Then you're gonna have a lunch at the winery on the patio. And I heard that somebody who joined me today might just pop up at that lunch too. You'll have a dinner at the gardens of Avila. You're gonna have a farm tour at the Avila Valley Barn. We're gonna meet again for a private winemaker dinner at the Avila Valley Barn. We added 2 tickets to the Tolosa biggest events of the year, the Primera release party. Primera being our flagship, it's the best Pinot Noir we can make from Edna Ranch. And then we're gonna send you home with wine, of course. We're gonna send you home with a collection of the Tolosa single vineyard wines and Primera. Not only wine, but magnums, professional bottles, twice the size of the regular bottles. That's Robin says that, so I'm stealing Robin's word. Wines for professional from large bottles. So please check out that auction, bid. Thank you for joining us again today, and cheers.
Thank you folks so much for joining us, and cheers.